Welcome to Season 2, Episode 6 of the Rethinking Faith podcast. Hi there, I'm Mitch Moyer. I'm your host tonight, and I've got with me both James Ballard and Ray Luke. And we are so excited to be back here tonight. We've got a really cool topic that we want to talk about. That is the topic of prayer. But before I hit this, I want to say hi to my co-host. James is up in Baltimore. James, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How's everyone doing tonight?
Hey man, we're in kind of a gloom. It's been gloomy and rainy here all day long, man. So, um, I'm kind of ready to get started on this for sure. What about you,
Yeah.
Ray? Ray's coming to us from down in sunny South Miami Beach, man. Come on, man. Come on,
What's
man.
what's going on, guys? I'm so glad to be here back with you guys again for this show, man.
Hey,
Yeah.
sounds good, man. Good. Well, we're
Many,
glad. We're glad
yeah,
to do that. This is interesting because, again, these topics lately have been pretty hardcore for me because they hit on some of the really hard foundational pieces of my early Christian walk. And prayer is one of those things that I don't think I've ever been involved in a church where at some point the pastor has either gone through a series or has talked about or has this desire to get his congregation or his group of people to learn to pray better, to be better prayers, okay? And sometimes that can be effective, sometimes it's the approach. But what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go all the way back to how prayer came about. And what I want to do is I want to read something out of a book here, out of a small pamphlet. It's called Rabbi Teach Us to Pray. It's by Aaron Eby. Aaron is with the staff at FFOZ, First Fruits of Zion. And again, the pamphlet is called Rabbi Teach Us to Pray. It's a simple read, but I'm going to open us up, guys, with this short read here. And in order to talk about prayer, you really need to go back to the beginning. You need to talk about discipleship for a moment, okay? And discipleship already existed as well established institution within Judaism long before the appearance of Jesus and his followers.
Yep.
All the great sages, rabbis, leaders of the Pharisees, and the teachers of the Bible had disciples. As a matter of fact, the Hebrew word for disciple is Talmud. But here's a problem. When you say Talmud, which was which is simply means student, okay? Within the Hebrew context or the Jewish context, a student looks a whole lot different than what we see today and what we see in the Christian environment. And so, what we want to do is we want to peel that back a little bit because a disciple's job was to learn everything his master had to teach. The association between the disciple and the master was much deeper than the typical teacher student relationship of today. Disciples memorize their teachers what? Interpretation, explanations, exegesis of scripture. That's huge when you talk about someone that goes to let's say you go to a mega church today and you've got a pastor up there and you're depending on that 20, 25, 30 minutes of teaching every week. And that is, that's what you're feeding off of for the week, okay? They memorize the stories, the parable, the illustrations, and anecdotes that their teachers tell. Disciples learn through imitation. They learn to live out the Bible's instructions by mimicking their teachers and incorporating their manner of observance into their own. Disciples keep the commandments the way they learn them from their teachers. In other words, if their teacher's teaching the commandments, they observe them. As we talked about in the last episode with the Sabbath, it just kind of sits out there, doesn't really get brought to light within Christian theology the way it should be. So therefore, it's not really observed the way it ought to be. A disciple endeavored to become like his or her teacher. A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. And this is the interesting part. This explains why Jesus' disciples were so eager to learn from the Lord about prayer. Of course, we see in Luke 11:1, Jesus was praying in a certain place. And when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, man, teach us to pray as John taught his disciples. This is really interesting, guys, because we know that everybody knew how to pray. Everybody was praying back then. It wasn't a new concept, but every rabbi had a certain segment or type or piece of prayer that they would add to prayer that distinguished them from other rabbis.
Yep.
John did this. Jesus did this. We talked about this in the Lord's Prayer. Praying is such a natural and simple act. Prayer is talking to God. It is what we were created to do. Is it necessary to study and research something so basic? Well, Jesus' disciples had grown up as observant Jews. They had been praying all their lives. Nevertheless, even after praying all their lives, they knew that there was more for them to learn, and they wanted to imitate their master in prayer. While prayer is a simple concept, it is worthy of deep and lifelong study. This was a new concept for me, switching over from one set of lens or one lens set to another, that even when it comes to prayer, it takes on a whole new pathway. We followers of Jesus today also desire to be true disciples. We wish to follow Jesus' teachings and imitate his actions and let his words flow easily from our lips. We want to pray as he prayed. Those of us in the Western world face somewhat of a cultural barrier. We follow a Jewish rabbi named Yeshua who lived thousands of years ago in the land of Israel. An artistic depiction throughout the centuries have shown it is much easier to make Jesus seem like one of us than for us to become like him. Becoming like him does not mean that non-Jewish Christians need become or act like first century Jews. However, for us to relate Jesus' teachings to our culture and time, we must recognize and understand the Jewish culture that permeates the New Testament. Just as the verse can be taken out of context, so what? The entire Bible can be taken out of context if it is divorced from its Jewish people. And then finally, the last piece. By the same token, we can gain such a richness and deep by restoring the Jewish context of the Gospels. Like the Jewish people who are returning to the land of Israel and thriving today, it is inspiring to see the words of our Master come alive when they too return to their native soil. Amen. I just wanted to share that because for me personally, we'll get into this, James and Ray, as we break down our study into prayer. But for me, back in the days of the Christian time, it was a lot of times prayer was a byproduct.
Yeah.
If I screwed up, Lord, fix this, and I swear I'll never do it again.
Yeah.
Or if I needed something, or if I was praying for somebody to be healed and so forth. But it really never went any deeper than that. It just, but then I began to realize that within the Jewish context, within the historical context, there's something so much more deeper than the words that we put out of our mouth that come with this whole concept of prayer. So with that having said that, James, we're going to start out with you first tonight, my brother. If you'll just kind of give me your thoughts and we'll start working our way through this, okay?
Yeah, you said a lot, but one thing that really resonated with me, I have to think back a few years myself. I couldn't imagine myself being interested in any topic focusing on quote unquote prayer. Not until I learned what prayer was initially, and then, as we'll cover tonight, what prayer was historically and what that looked like in the first century. Until I realized the history and what has happened to prayer through time, I thought I understood prayer. I thought, I grew up with people who taught me how to pray. I didn't know how to do that. You just, you fold your hands and you close your eyes. And that, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people in our culture have some version of that today. and they think that they've got prayer understood. But when you understand it in its first century Jewish context, you understand tefillah, the word, right, that we'll be talking about tonight. You'll understand that we've really gotten this wrong in the last couple thousand years, and we paid the price. So I'm excited about diving into this. I think anyone who's listening, bear with us. We're going to go into some history, but I think you'll emerge from this episode with a new look at prayer. We'll go into, the meditative history of prayer, right? We'll look at the Jewish concept of what's called dvekas or dvekut, however you want to pronounce that, the clinging to the Creator. And then, if we have time, we'll wrap up with some just some general tips for prayer. But this is something that is constantly evolving, and something that we all should be striving. And I know the three of us are striving to get better at.
So I had a few as Mitch was going on there. I had a few thoughts. I mean, that I think will be good for our listeners. I mean, prayer is such an important aspect of the avodah Hashem. So the service of God is such an important aspect in everything that you do. Um, I mean, there are debates among the rabbis in the Gemara that they speak about, what's more important, Torah study or prayer? And you'll have like a group of them say, prayer is more important, and then another group says, well, Torah study is more important. And so there's this sort of debate going back and forth. But
Yeah.
I can tell you that it's so interesting to me coming from a Christian background, right? Christians only seem to know about, at least evangelical Christians seem only to know about one type of prayer, because I know that there's two major types of prayers in Torah in Judaism, right? And that is the set prayers, and we find them in the Siddur. Okay, I think Catholics and maybe Greek Orthodox may have some understanding of what that is, because they
Yeah.
still have this in their services. But evangelicals have no idea what that is, and might even laugh at something like that. Most Christians from the Western world, as I grew up, we only know about spontaneous prayer. That you go into your room, and you go and you just open your heart out to God and you speak to Him from your heart. This is the other type of prayer that there is in Judaism. It's a type of meditation, actually. It's called hitbodidu. Okay, and so that is what it is. It's spontaneous prayer. That's what we from the Christian world most likely grew up with. And I find this so interesting. I mean, when I began to learn, the background of what's going on, why is it that when I go to synagogue, we read from the Siddur? That part was new to me. We read from the set prayers, but then I started to figure out that Jews too pray spontaneous prayer and meditation. It's a type of meditation. So, I mean, that was big. I mean, that was big for me, and it's good to have both in your daily prayer life. So those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
When we think about prayer, early on, we look into scriptures for examples of prayer, and even going all the way back to Adam. Okay, and just as we move forward to what fascinated me about unfolding and discovering the history of prayer is how it relates to certain other aspects within Judaism. For instance, we get the times of the temple offerings and sacrifices from prayer. But Jews and Jesus was a great example. They didn't pray one time a day. There was a cycle of prayers. And this cycle of prayers began back with Abraham. There's 3 times a day they will pray: morning, late afternoon, and evening. And so Abraham actually modeled the prayers for the morning as he arose in the morning. And you can see that in Genesis 19:27. Then Isaac, he went out to converse in the field toward the evenings. We see that in Genesis 24:63. And then finally, Jacob instituted the evening prayer, which he encountered the place and slept there in Genesis 28:11. But what fascinates me about this is This is a repetitive piece of action
Mm-hmm.
that makes, we talk about something in, whether it's law enforcement or bodybuilding or working out, we talk about things like muscle memory. And if you do something consistently, okay, you get better at it. Okay, whether it's a certain technique that you use in a combat situation, or whether it's a certain way that you work out, things like this. The more that you engage that, the more that you use that muscle, it becomes more familiar with that action and becomes more solid, and it has a better effect. It's the same thing with prayer. You pray 3 times a day and you add anything else to it, it becomes repetitive, almost like mind memory, to where you're having what's a consistent conversation with God. Um, only having a conversation with God when things go south on you, or only
Yeah.
having a conversation with God before you eat dinner for like 10 seconds or whatever. But it's that consistency that rolls on. And a lot of Christians are like, that's repetitiveness. It's the same thing you're doing day in and day out. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason
Yeah.
God institutes these types of cycles, because those cycles create that like that muscle memory that creates a better tactical way, or a better way of letting it become a part of your DNA. Do you
Sure.
follow what I'm saying?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so important, man. I mean, what you said about people only praying when they think that there's like, they're in a crisis or something like that. I mean, I believe it's Maimonides, the Rambam, who talks about the fact that folks don't know. I mean, a lot of times people may feel that they're not always in a crisis, but the Rambam taught that man is always in a in a state of crisis if he actually understood his position in front of God, that every day is a day of grace, and that the next moment is not guaranteed.
True.
And so man should constantly be in a state of meditative prayer, uh, outside of the times that you pray, whether it is when you before you go to sleep or when you get up in the morning. uh, Man needs to understand that he's always in a state of crisis. Okay.
Well, Ray, let me just add this. When I was growing up, you never heard about things like depression, anxiety, ADD, panic attacks and stuff like this.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
now that we live in a world where it's go, 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 the foods that we eat, the drinks that we drink, the atmosphere that we
Yeah.
are consistently around, the stresses that the body takes on. And if you don't have positive ways of dealing with that stress, and positive ways mentally of dealing with that type of pressure, then you're going to go with negative ways, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever it might be. This is the reason why the incorporation of this type of prayer was so crucial and is so needed today, because it gives you a consistency of being close to God and fighting that negative piece that's constantly coming at you, and gives you an opportunity to work with it, where you're not getting cornered and going into something that, are using something that may not be beneficial for you. That makes sense.
Yep.
Very. Yep. So, one thing I think to get us, I know we've kind of started, but to kind of cover some bases, the way the Jewish world looks at prayer, it first recognizes that this is a commandment. Again, this
Yeah.
goes back to our oral Torah episode, though. The commandment is to pray, but there's no exact instruction for how to do that. And that comes from the
Yeah.
oral tradition, but it is a commandment nonetheless. And we see this in Deuteronomy 11:13. You shall serve God with your whole heart. And the
Service
Talmud
of the
says,
heart.
yep, the Talmud says,
Yes.
what is the service performed by the heart? And it's prayer. So
Yep.
then to make sure that people do this every day, you get this structured set of prayers. And like you said, Mitch, beautifully, these go back to the patriarchs. The rabbis didn't just make these up. Through the Torah, they found that the patriarchs laid out this program, right? So and that's what the temple is built on. The temple prayer times are built on the patriarchs' prayers. But then, Judaism has a series of blessings. I mean, there are many, many blessings. Blessings for seeing a rainbow, for eating certain types of food. There are some really funny ones too, and some practical ones. After you use the bathroom, there's a blessing. And if you were to add these 3 prayer times by the temple, and you were to add these as they call it 100 blessings per day, you would get this constant praying. You get this constant awareness of God. And about 100 years ago, a Rabbi Meir Kagan, penned the Mishnah Berurah, and he basically said that. He said the purpose of the blessings are to help us remember the Creator in our lives. It's supposed to help us humans who are highly distractible to remember that the Creator is always with us and there are always miracles at all times. So it's more than just fulfilling the commandment. Now we're talking about broadening our consciousness, pulling us out of our distractions back into that God consciousness. And I think we're going to touch on that in a little bit. But I think number one, we fulfill the commandment. Then we start to build our consciousness. And that's where prayer starts to kind of broaden into different pathways at that point. And Ray, like you said, yeah, beautiful. Sometimes it comes from a structured siddur. Other times it's kind of left to you and your Creator. And that's that individual relationship that each of us have.
Yeah, that's real beautiful, man. And James, man, it's important to cover like the fact that the prayer service actually followed the 3 times that the sacrifices were offered at the temple times. Right. And so there's a pasuk, there's a verse in the Bible where it talks about that that Hashem has he doesn't need the sacrifices. Of what he wants is the heart, right? And so the rabbis, they understand that he's after the temple was destroyed and we no longer have sacrifices, what's the word I'm looking for? What takes the stand for the sacrifices at the time is the service of the heart. Yep. These sacrifices. I mean, I'm going to read something here to you guys. It's by Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, the late Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. He says, in the world of sacrifices and sacred items, which are kedushim, holy, the situation is entirely different. He says the key concept in sacrifices, the basis of the whole structure, is that of ba'alut, which means ownership or mastery, either private or communal, with a few exceptions. For example, the Ketz HaMitzbeah, and they give a source in the Mishnah Shekhalim. It says a sacrifice always involves ownership. The individual who brings a sacrifice is the owner, the master. The requirement to give is addressed only to someone who is able to give. Thus, as in a certain sense, man is considered his own master. It is only because of this that he can be asked to offer himself as a sacrifice to God. And that's prayer, your whole life, it's like that. Really, really interesting. I saw this and I was like, man, that's just beautiful.
Yeah, that is beautiful.
When we often think of that, Ray, as the level of prayer, it is a learning curve for those who come from a certain segment of theological thinking or from a certain whatever. But then they move over and they begin to see this, and they've been told that you don't need structured prayer. You don't need, it needs to be spontaneous. That, God's your friend, Jesus is your best friend, whatever. You need to converse with them, right before you go to a football game or whatever. And so, but then it's creating that mindset and that ability to understand the importance of prayer as it comes in with people or with the sages or with those that that we look at and we see these examples of prayer. Because you mentioned something called the siddur, and for those out there that don't know what that is actually a book of prayer that follows throughout the day. It can be used throughout the day. It can be used throughout holidays, festivals, and so forth, things like that. But at the same time, it's not meant to be only what's, what's
Exactly.
allowed to be, allowed to be prayed and allowed for you to do. So incorporating that into a life of someone who has never been used to that, it's for me, I have to set calendar times, up on our schedule times up on my phone if I'm working, and stuff, things like that. Set up something that will alert me, okay, it's time to get off to myself for a few moments. It's a time to focus in on the words, the gratitude, the sacrifice, the element of me, you know letting my heart and my soul slow down a little bit. And that's difficult for a lot of people to do, but it's so rewarding as you begin to work that process and you realize that this is exactly what Yeshua did. This is what Jesus did. This was not foreign to him or the disciples. And there was a reason for that, guys, right? And so that's something that when all of that melds together, it gives a little bit more of a kind of a push behind it and a more of a desire, because you have prayers that start out first thing in the morning. You have prayers that go through the day. You have prayers that go through the afternoon on into the evening, and then right before you close your eyes and call it a day.
Yep.
So it's
I
really
mean,
fascinating. Go ahead, man.
it's very important that our listeners understand. And I mean, and I hate to say this. I hate to say the Jewish Jesus or the Jewish apostle. I mean, this is the historical context. The historical context means that they're Jews within Judaism. And so, I mean, right in the text, so that our listeners can understand this, right in the text that I want to say it's either I think it's in Acts. It says that the apostles gathered in the temple. It says for communion, and it says to pray the prayers, the
Yeah.
prayers with a definite article,
Mhm.
meaning this is not something that they just was spontaneously praying. This is some set prayers that all Jews would do
Yep.
at the temple times. Okay, and various scholars have pointed this out. Scholars that deal with the historical context, that understand that the writings of that time, that there are other writings that say the same thing. The prayers. It's
Yep.
talking about some type of set prayers. You know,
And if you
but I mean,
remember,
go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but if you remember Cornelius also, so it's one thing to say the Jews prayed the prayers, but Cornelius is praying what seems to be mincha when he has his
Yeah,
vision.
yeah, yeah.
So we're talking now, not just Jews, we're talking people among the Jewish community.
Great point. That's a great point, James. That's good, man.
When did they become organized? When did it shift off of if we call it spontaneous to become more organized? And
Yeah.
how did that take place, and what did that look like at that time?
Before I dive into that, I do want to clarify one thing. Ray just kind of took us to a beautiful place, which could be a show on its own. I think we have to sort of resurrect the idea of the temple. Much of the church has this belief that when the veil, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here, the veil was torn, now you
Yeah,
have access to God. That was never the understanding in the Jewish world. In fact, that whole passage is a midrash that we'll have to break apart at some point, that I think there's something bigger going on. But anybody could pray to the Creator at any time. And
yep,
especially in the first century, you had a very spontaneous nature of prayer that outside of the structured schedule. So we'll
yes,
say in the centuries before Yeshua came, you had an influx of people coming. There were more Jews, again, we said this, outside of Israel than there were in Israel. But as people started coming back and setting up, they recognized that people didn't speak the same language. People didn't know prayers as much, and they had a little bit of a problem. We now have people who are bringing idolatry into the mix. And
yep,
at this time, prayer was very meditative. And you can see this in the writings of the sages, that the schools of prophets had many, many, Talmudim, as you would say, students. And they would learn these. You don't just have prophecy walking down the road and it just hits you.
right, right.
there is a lot of effort that goes into it. So what they were doing is they were finding people were having spiritual experiences through idolatrous practices. They were taking a shortcut. So the sages got together and they said, this is a problem. We we need to figure out how to prevent them from going down this path, but there might be a cost. And Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan has this in one of his books, and it's a meditation in Kabbalah. But what they find is one of the surviving schools of the prophets at this time were actually the Pharisees, and they were teaching people how to remain pure and follow the Torah and pray to a schedule. And they were kind of building a somewhat guided method of prayer for people at this time, because it was no
Yes.
longer safe and kosher to let people go off into meditation. But needless to say, prayer was still meditation. The main prayer that was formalized at this time is the Amida. It's the standing prayer, also called Shmona Esrei, the 18
Yep.
benedictions, which actually is 19 benedictions. We'll talk about that later. But that was the prayer that was structured at this time for people to come back to, and that is a very good prayer. But the way people read it today and the way they read it in the first century are very different. They would have spent, and the Talmud talks about this, they would spend an hour before they even get to the prayer, and then they would spend an hour on the prayer. And it's about an 8-minute prayer if you read it start to finish. It's about 8 minutes. It doesn't take that long. So they were doing what you see Yeshua doing. They were going off and they were spending time in meditation for their hitbo to do. So prayer, it looked more like what people are trying to get to today, a way of disconnecting from the day-to-day activities of life and focusing and trying to connect with the Creator in a real way. They weren't sitting down and just pounding through a few prayers as fast as they could, or as disconnected, right? They wanted to spend time and be very mindful of what they were doing, and in humility and in love seek the Creator. And it wouldn't be until after this time period that the prayers, and this is something I'm experiencing as well in the Jewish side of things. There is a precedent to go from the Siddur more often than not. The Orthodox community, in my opinion, and I have some friends who've admitted as such, they struggle with this on the other side now. Now there's not so much of a meditation problem. It's more of I'm not connecting through the Siddur, but they're not exactly exposed to what I think the Protestant community has the other piece of, the personal prayer. So it's almost like like the Orthodox, side of the Jewish world and the Christian Protestant world have two pieces of this puzzle. But if both could kind of recognize that both the meditative and the structured prayer are part of the
Torah.
tradition, we'd be in a good place. But I find that at that time, just to recap, prayer was meditative and sort of free form, and they had to really kind of lock that down to protect people. And I think the repercussion was that prayer became structured. And unfortunately, the church coming out of a Jewish tradition cut its own roots off. So they're not aware that there is this whole other wing of prayer that the Jewish world really offered.
Yeah, I mean that's a great recap there. I think that we find Yeshua doing this. This is so interesting. In my studies I see this. You'll read in the New Testament. I mean, it'll say something like, "And Yeshua got up extremely early, and he went into the wilderness." Okay, he went into the wilderness, or he went somewhere by himself, and he prayed. It says it just like that, and he prayed, right? This is more than likely spontaneous prayer. What do you do? In meditation, he was meditating and praying to the Creator. It was a time to take a good look at yourself, and to make a reckoning. Okay, it was a time to see how you were doing throughout the day, or how you were doing in life, to connect. How you were talking about the Vekus, connecting to the Creator. What is your time being spent on? Is this the right way to spend your life, to behave as you do before God? So you will go through this whole reckoning. It was a prayer can have that link to Musar too, ethics and morality. Especially spontaneous prayer. I think the fact of the liturgical aspect, the set prayers, for me were very important. They were very important to help me to think about more than just my own needs. To think of, because when when you engage in spontaneous prayer every day, a lot of times, what do? You're always asking, right? For the most part, you're always asking, but you don't ever sit to think, just to thank the Creator. This is what the set prayers help you to do, to
Great
help you to
point.
think about life, to help you to think about the priorities of life, your life, the people of God, whoever they may be, wherever they may be, to pray for them, you know, um, your children, your job, everything. The set prayers do these things. They
Yeah.
do them for the Sabbath. They do them for the holy days. They do them for at nighttime before you go to bed, when you get up at midday. So it keeps to keep you focused. Yes, it could be rigid, and it could be like a routine if you fall into the routine. This is where the other half of what you're talking about, the hippodidu and the meditation.
Yeah.
Meditation is a This is why prayer is so important, because in prayer you have both aspects, right? And the meditation aspect, the hippodidu aspect, the spontaneous prayer aspect, is literally a spark or an aspect of prophecy. I'm not
Yeah.
kidding. This is what the rabbis, they talk about this. When you're meditating, that's why a lot of times you even hear Paul. He says, and I went into the seventh heaven, or something like that. What do you think he was doing? He was meditating. He was in this. And the other rabbis, when you read the their writings, they say that in meditation they go into a realm of prophecy,
Yeah.
and they are able to see things and hear things that we cannot even imagine. Okay. And so, I mean, prayer is it's more important that we know, honestly, and it's something that's very much it's lacking, and a lot of people don't put a lot of attention to it. Something that needs to change.
Yeah.
Great point.
Two things that, listening to both of you guys for a couple of seconds there. One is the meditative aspect of it. Uh, coming out of the Christian mindset, there you didn't use that term. There was not that term used. Okay.
Right.
Um, unless you went to some place that was still stuck in the 60s and they were selling little round, but anyway, I'm just joking on that. But Jesus, when Jesus and meditation were hand in hand. I mean, when you look at Jesus and meditation, where he would withdraw to isolated places and pray. Okay,
Yeah.
like you said, early in the morning while it was still dark, Yeshua got up, slipped out to a solitary place to pray. And then finally, and after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But you know
Beautiful.
what? There are amazing, when you look at the Psalms, when you look at, Ray turned me on to a fantastic book, which, by the way, I just ordered the other 6 copies of it, man.
Oh, you're the man. You're the man.
Yeah,
And let me say this. Let me say this real quick, Mitch. It is important to also state that many of the rabbis engage in the same thing,
Oh,
especially one of our favorites, and that's Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. I mean,
yes.
he talks about doing the same exact thing. Go to a solitary place. He even says in the wilderness somewhere where it's just you and the Creator, and meditate and pray. Go ahead, brother. I just wanted to say that.
No. And that you brought up, Rebbe Nachman, his, there's a book called The 50th Gate, and there's actually 7 in the volumes, and each volume has 20 prayers in them. Prayers that cover everything from
Beautiful stuff. Yeah.
scripture study to how you get along with your fellow person. And what I'm finding is that taking that and simply getting outside, getting away from the traffic, getting away from people, and getting just you know getting into a place of solitude and reading through those prayers before I actually get to the prayer where I connect to God on my own and say,
Yes.
here's where I'm struggling at. But even if you don't have, a book like the 50th Gate, but something like the Book of Psalms, and you go through several Psalms and you repeat them and you
Yep.
listen to what you're saying and you take them within your heart. And James, at the end of this, he's going to give some pointers on, and these are fantastic pointers. I wish I'd have had these years ago. about increasing your prayer activity. But meditation is a very crucial piece of setting up the heart, setting up the mind, and setting up
Amen.
the whole being to become to go face to face with God and say, okay, now we talk. And that's something that like I said, you don't hear a lot of in the Christian circles, because it's kind of, oh, okay,
Yeah.
you're a little bit out there on the fringe, man.
I mean, at least the Christian background that I came from, if you use the word meditation, people thought that you were in some type of cult.
Sure.
Meditation, what? I mean,
Still
Yeah,
that was, yeah, you had to be
yeah,
very careful with that, because
yes.
we just didn't know any better. But man, think about this for a second. We're talking about a being that is outside of creation, whatever that means, right? And it is only the spark of our soul, the spirit, and that which dwells within man, that when you concentrate and you really pour out your heart, there are times when man can really connect to his own soul, because a lot of times people just go through the motions. If you think about it, throughout your day, there's a lot of things that you do and go through the motions, but that you're not always present.
Mhm.
This is what prayer is supposed to be like. You're supposed to connect to the present, and you're supposed to be all there. If you're all there, you can use your soul, listen to this, to connect to the creator.
Yeah.
And you pour out your heart to him, you pour out your soul to him. This is the way you connect back and forth. Prayer is something that, for the most part, works. It's in man's benefit to pray for
Hmm.
himself. People think that you can't do anything for God. We don't do anything for God, but he does listen to prayer. And a lot of people be like, my prayers are not answered. Actually, he did answer. It may be the answer you weren't trying to listen to. You don't want to hear. I mean, sometimes the thing can be no.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Or was your heart prepared to go before him to pray? And that
exactly.
and that preparation is as crucial a lot of times, because the Christian rebuttal to this will be, well, God already knows your heart. Okay.
No, what does Yeshua say? He
Yeah, but
says,
that's not the point. Jesus says, but when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you.
reward you.
Okay. I It's not the point that, okay, he knows what I'm about to come forth with. It's the preparation of your existence, the preparation of your soul, the preparation
Amen.
of your mind. And you do that through certain types of prayer exercises. And then once that
Yeah.
preparation has hit that certain level, then it's on. I mean, it's totally on. I never experienced that. Never did I experience that within the Christian realm when I was
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
that, until I began to walk this process.
Yeah, you'll find that, we struggle with the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hatov. We're stuck between this body consciousness and this soul consciousness. And our job, our spiritual work in this world, is to have our soul consciousness dominate our body so that we can do the spiritual work and we can grow. And if you find yourself, lost in your day, you're doing the physical things, you're not thinking about your soul, then you're probably out of sync, right? Your soul is not in sync. And prayer is that chance to kind of recalibrate and bring that soul level focus back to our days. And that is why we're here. Our job, our entire job in this existence, this life, is to make that journey, that cleaving to the creator, right? To remember that we have a creator and bring that light down and let it
Man.
reflect everything we do. And it's not surprising to me that most people in our culture are struggling and they don't see prayer as valuable, because like you said, we have this belief that if I ask for something, I'll get it. And then you ask for something and you don't get it in the way you want it. And that's just the wrong way to go into prayer. Prayer is a soul calibration. We're here to manifest and be creators for the creator. Like, we're made in the image of the creator. We're here to manifest the creator's will on earth.
Wow.
There are rabbis today, and I'm thinking of Rav Daniel Katz, the Elevation Project. He'll say that the law of attraction is actually in the Ten Commandments, the law against coveting. because what you focus your mind and your energy on, you, as he says, you will drag it to you. So
So true, man. That's so
we
true.
see, yeah, right in the Ten Commandments, we're seeing that what the New Age world might call manifestation or law of attraction, it's actually in the Torah. I don't know that we understand that so much. And there's a verse that he, again, I've sourced this, and we can put this up on our site. Genesis 2:5 says that, and there's no shrub of the field yet on earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord God had not sent a rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil. So if we slow down and we read that in its context, and again, we've mentioned Rashi before, but Rashi says, and this is powerful, okay? This sort of tells us why we're here and what prayer is about. This gives us a hint. Rashi says, because there was no man to till the ground, and there was therefore no one to recognize the utility of rain. So when Adam came and was created, he realized it was necessary for the world. He prayed for it, and it fell.
Wow.
And that's Rashi. So we're going back 1,000 years, and you'll see this. The sages understood this inherently, and we have to kind of dig these traditions out. But Rashi is telling us that things happen on the planet because we pray for them, because we understand our role under the Creator, and we pray for His will on earth. Right?
Wow, that's amazing that you said that. Like you said, I was getting ready to say that Yeshua says that in his prayer as he teaches his disciples.
Absolutely.
One of the main things that he says in another place, actually, before I get there, he says, you pray, but you don't receive because you don't pray correctly. What does he mean by that?
That's right.
What he means is this: in his prayer, when he teaches his disciples how to pray, he says, he's talking about God, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Yep. If we live our life with that mindset to do God's will, everything changes. Because then I think that your petitions or everything will go the correct way, because you're not seeking your own will, right? Which is a very high level, but you're seeking the will of the Creator, which is an even higher level. So I think that, think about the way Yeshua lived and how he taught his disciples. That's huge. That's huge what you just brought up there.
And what does the world look like if we don't pray correctly? Right? It looks like the world we have today. Things run their course as Hashem warns us in Leviticus 26. If you want to pretend like, or if you want to forget that I'm here, I'll let you live as if I'm not here. Right? That's kind of the paraphrase is. And we're seeing that today. We're seeing a world that's fallen apart.
Yes.
And what we're seeing is a return. There's sort of a spiritual renaissance. People are understanding that our minds and our will has power. And where some traditions, like the church that I came through, are kind of afraid of meditation and they don't like the word manifestation, others are recognizing that this is what's missing in humanity today. And because we're not being intentional, and because we're not praying, and because we're not putting our words and our thoughts and the energy behind them into play for good, we're seeing chaos and we're seeing disorder. And, again, you go back 1,000 years to Rashi, and he tells us that's what's going on. You go back another 1,000 years, and we're in the time of the sages, and they knew this.
Incredible. I tell folks all the time, I say that people, especially the Christian world that we live in, the only time they really tend to pray, they believe in God as a genie, and you rub the lamp and you're supposed to get these wishes. The only time they ever pray is when they're sick, or when they need some money, or when there's some type of test. These are times that you should pray, but the intention of the heart and the service of heart, which is prayer, is not in the correct order. This is not the way it works. And so that's why a lot of times we don't hear from God, because it's all out of whack, man. God is not someone, people don't understand. God is not someone we're going to be able to trick or use him like a genie. That's not happening.
No, and I think both of you hit the nail on the head, where we're living in a time where we're seeing the ineffectiveness of the church, because they let it get to a point where it became so superficial that the foundation has crumbled, and now you've got people that could care less. They can't stand on solid ground anymore. Their personal well-being, their personal health, their personal psychological well-being, the ability to to try to keep up with the world today has gotten to such a high level, especially with interactions with people, associates they work with people that they associate with, family members. You got it going off the chain in all directions, and you cannot. I'm going to repeat myself. You cannot get a clear picture and a clear understanding from some of the teachings that we hear today unless you begin to put effective pieces of the puzzle back to the where they were supposed to be,
Yeah.
and allow them to effectively, impact your soul, impact your being, impact who you are, how you treat other people. I just don't see that. I don't see that. And and I'll say this, it might get me kicked off the show, but I will say this, that the the church is feeling it. The church is
Yeah.
feeling it in a very difficult way, that they're playing catch up again. And there's nothing worse than being responsible for a group of people when it comes to their faith, and you have to constantly play catch up. Whereas if you begin to instill the solid foundations, contextual pieces of historical context, you allow them to see and understand scripture the way it ought to be, and to build the correct type of foundation, they got nothing to stand on, man. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
like you said, we're seeing doors shut every day. We're seeing, churches just kind of falling by the wayside, and it's sad. It's sad because they could have an impact, but it's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
Let's James, let's move over to here, and let me hear what you got to say about some tips for prayer, and what would you suggest to somebody like myself who has come out of thinking of prayer a certain way, thinking that that was all I needed, and I'm now, understanding a little bit more about the creation of prayer, how it impacts, how it moves, how it works with you.
Yeah.
What would be some tips that you would offer up for someone to begin this process of moving a little bit deeper within their prayer life?
Good. Yeah. I would say first and foremost, change your belief system. So
Hmm.
it's very important to know that we
Wow.
have been given very powerful tools of the mind and the soul, and we have to put them into play. And to be fair, with the last comment, I think the Jewish world struggles with this too, because certain parts of the tradition have been kind of hidden. The world of Jewish prayer and meditative history, you kind of have to dig for that in some traditions. But so for people who are looking for it in the Torah, I would say first and foremost, change the belief systems. It's there for you. So number one, build a at least 3 days a week. If you can do every day, 20, 30 minutes of meditation. This is incredibly important. This would be silencing your phone, or using some like binaural audio or something that you can
Good
do to
point.
keep yourself from being distracted. You want to be quiet, and you want to have quiet of the mind so that you can hear, right? These are times of insight, and you have to make room for that in our very distractible society. Some ways of really changing the way you go about living your life is something called kavana, or kavana, however you want to pronounce that.
Yeah.
And that's this intention, this like this holy focus that the sages will talk about. And for example, try to spend a few minutes a day being very focused on what you're doing. So if I've said this before in some of the classes I've taught, if you are making a cup of coffee for someone in your house, or you're making food for someone, do it with absolute focus on what you're doing. Be thankful for the person in your life, and that you want to help, right? Because you're transferring that energy and that holiness into what you're doing. And I love quantum physics, and there's a lot of research around this today. Again, the sages beat us to it, but there's research that does make a material impact on fluids and on matter. It's really fascinating stuff, but it comes from the mind. It takes that moment of being present and doing things with kavana, with that focus.
Hmm.
Visualization. A lot of times, these Hasidic masters are known for their for their blessings. These blessings come true. People go all over the world to meet these rebbes and get a blessing. What they're doing is not only are they living a life of Torah and they're keeping themselves very pure, but when they pray and they make these blessings, these are people who are skilled at meditative visualization. So what they're doing is they're actually kind of envisioning what they are hoping to see, and they're creating such a perfect mental image, and they're sending that up to the creator, and they're leaving it in faith. They're not attached to the outcome. They're sending that message up, and they're walking away with perfect faith and emuna that the creator is going to make that happen, right? And this kind of faith is fascinating. There's a lot of research on this.
Yeah.
How is it that these Pentecostal preachers are bitten by snakes and they're not killed by this venom, right? There's a lot of research on this, and it's because a lot of times the research has concluded that they're walking in with this unbelievable faith that that's not going to happen, right? So you'll see these things manifest in other ways in other traditions, but start using it in your prayers. If you want to see something happen for somebody, you want to see a healing, picture them not sick, picture them happy on the other side of that, healed, right? You don't have to worry about how it happens. That's the creator's job, but use that visualization to do that. You mentioned the Psalms. The Psalms are very powerful. There are some Jewish traditions where you don't even have to know the Hebrew, but just speaking the transliterated audible Hebrew, and you can find those today, gives the Psalms a level of power, because the Hebrew language is a holy language. It's the language of the angels. It's the language of creation. So when you read these Psalms, you mentioned Mitch, Rabbi Nachman, he has a bunch of these Psalms that he himself has sort of detailed as meditative Psalms. And they're powerful. This would be Psalm 3 and 6, 13, 20, 23, 30, 38, 39, 40, and 121. So just read through these, and you can read through them in English if you have to. I really think that the creator gets the message, right? Just take the time and do that for people. Another thing I think is very valuable and powerful, blessings. So you can look these up. Just look up Jewish blessings. I think it's probably the easiest way to find them, or we can post a few. But these really do create a God consciousness in our life. Every single day you'll wake up, and before you drink water, you'll say a blessing, and you're constantly bringing down that awareness of the
Yeah.
creator. Another good one, this is good for kids. You can simply find something like a leaf, something in creation, a leaf or a flower, put that in your hand and stare at it for a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever it takes, and just really notice the detail and just the structure of these things, and just kind of go into hyper focus of awe, because what you're doing is you are cutting off all the distractions of TV and electronics, and you're looking at nature and creation, and you're connecting with it in a very powerful way. And these are very easy to do, right? As the weather gets nicer and it starts to become spring and summer, this will be very easy to do. And the reason I think these are important, there's a lot of study and research today in epigenetics, and what they're finding is our beliefs inform and govern our biology. So the shortest way I can say this, you're not beholden to your genetic makeup anymore, as research 100 years ago and beyond would have believed. You can now change that. Your brain interprets the world, and however you interpret that world, it sends a chemical signal to your blood, and new cells that are generated are formed in that blood culture. However, your brain chemistry is informing it. So if you are living in a state of fight or flight, and you're stressed all the time, or you're angry, or politics are dragging you out, you need meditation to change your chemistry. Not only because it'll help you spiritually and mentally, it'll also help you physically. Your body will start to reproduce in a healthier generation of cells. And there's a lot of research. So I encourage everyone to look up epigenetics if you're kind of into the science of this. But what you're doing is you're building your faith, you're building your recognition in the creator, you're changing your physical structure in your health. You're actually, empowering your body and your immune system. And ultimately you're creating new habits which will remind you of the creator's presence in your life every hour of the day. I think it's really sad that this tradition has not been passed down through the church,
Yeah.
but here we are, right? We're kind of bringing it back to you. Make time for meditation, appreciate the creation, understand how you are impacted if you're not making this time, and get after it. I'd love to hear what people find when they start this. Reach us on our Facebook page and let us know.
It's
Yeah,
good.
man. I wanted to say that very short. I think what I did in my life for years now is, especially in our times that it's so technologically advanced. I set alarms on my phone
Oh yeah.
for my times of prayer, so that I can remember, right? So what I would do is I would use some of the techniques that James just mentioned. What I would do is when my alarm would go off, whether it was in the morning, um, mostly in the morning and at night, my alarm would go off and I would go to pray and I would read a few songs. That was the first thing I would do. It was kind of just set the mood of my meditation and to get me to think about God, His will, and the things that are important. And then after I would do that, I would go ahead and speak to God from my heart. Uh, but the Psalms, like James was saying, the Psalms are very powerful. They're powerful the way they set the tone in your heart and in your mind, and get you to think about God and His will. Um, I wanted to read this real quick. This is from Rabbi Nachman's one of his works on prayer. It's called "Outpouring of the Soul." It says like this. It says, "Who is the person who desires life?" This is actually from Psalm 34:13. It's a question. It says, "Who is truly concerned about himself? Who is the one who wishes to be worthy of serving God through prayer, which is which is a person's main source of life, as it is written, prayer to God is my life." Psalm 42:9. Through prayer, one can also bring life force to all the spiritual universes. Okay, and James just he mentioned that, and think about this for a second, guys. This is according to the most greatest and deepest levels of understanding amongst the Jews. According to Kabbalah and Chassidut, right?
Yeah.
They teach that the main weapon of the Messiah, his main source of weapon, is not a sword. It's not a nuclear weapon. Well, the nuclear weapon is this. It's prayer. It says the main weapon of the Messiah is prayer. They also teach the main weapon of the righteous is prayer. This is the weapon. I mean, in Isaiah, it says that the Messiah, he will slay the wicked with what? With the breath of his lips. They're talking about his prayer life, his words. This is how he would slay the wicked, because he'll be intimately connected and attached
Mm-hmm.
to the Creator and His will.
Yeah.
So it's extremely important to know these facets in this background that we need to bring back into the Christian community of prayer life.
Mm, it's
That's a
great,
great point.
great, great practical pieces there, James. Great, you too, Ray from Rebbe Nachman. I think there's one last piece to add, and from my side, and that is connecting yourself to a true tzaddik, to a true righteous teacher, and learning not just the ways of living, but the ways of connecting to God and the ways of connecting through the scriptures. And I think the combination of attaching yourself to a tzaddik, be it Yeshua, uh, you know, Rebbe Nachman, whatever, learn, learn those things that make them, because Jesus, Yeshua, is very clear about how important prayer is. He shows it. That was an example throughout the Gospels when it talks about his life. Both of you guys have given great examples of like I said, of practical ways to move forward with it. I like James. I like what you said there at the very beginning. Find yourself a new belief system, and that is so true, because it takes a humble man in today's world to go, you know what? Maybe there's something more to this. And then when you do take that step and you realize the truth is sitting out there, and that truth can dig into your soul in ways you've never experienced before. It's an amazing process. So I'm going to ask you guys if you have any closing comments on this section on prayer. I think Um, I've learned a lot. First of all, I appreciate what you guys bring to the conversation because I'm still learning this process. Like Ray said, with the kind of work that I do, setting alarms and being able to, just calm myself down after a particular situation or calm myself down, during a particular time during the day is extremely beneficial, but it's a process, and it's a process to create a habit, and that habit then allows you to connect in a way that you may have never connected before. But you have any last words, Mr. James, you wanna throw at us as we close this session down?
Yeah, I think we said a lot, and I feel as if we gave a pretty comprehensive list of different types of prayer. But I'll add one more. I think this is for people to try tonight. So go back and listen to the episode and write down the list and keep track of our Facebook page. We'll list these for you. But one to do tonight. It's a very important practice that the Hasidic masters have taught. It's called Cheshbon HaNefesh. And it's a
Mm,
type of prayer that you go back through your day and you just look for opportunities to ask forgiveness, and you look for opportunities where you could have done things better,
mm-hmm.
and you even look for opportunities to release people from things they did to you. And
Yeah.
there's a really powerful energetic release that you're doing when you do this. Number one, you're clearing the balance. So if you're in Israel and you're at a restaurant and you say Heshbon, they'll bring you your check. That's what it is. So you're wiping away the tab of the day. And if you do this every day, you're clearing debts, right? For people who owe them to you, and for you to others. But it's also a really good way of being mindful. And it makes you mindful of how you live, because at the end of the day you're going to take account for that. So I would say one of the first things to start with tonight, or when you're listening to this episode, take some time before you go to sleep and go back through your day. Kind of mindfully go back through your day and remember what you did, and start there. That's a pretty
Mm,
easy one to do, and it really does move the needle in terms of spiritual growth.
Beautiful. Beautiful, James. Yeah, making a reckoning, man. That's beautiful.
that's good. Ray, do you have anything you want to add to the closing
No,
here,
man. I
buddy?
mean, I wish, honestly, man, that that we had more time. This is such a topic that I myself, this year, I've tried to get closer to in meditation and closer to prayer. We all need it, man. I mean, this world needs it. And prayers, being mindful of other people, being mindful of our families and praying for them, and just seeking out the Creator's will in meditation and prayer. I mean, it's something that I've tried to engage this new year, to learn as much as I can, and to actually engage in the practice of thoughtful and mindful, with good intentions, prayer.
Yeah.
Hmm, beautiful. Thank you, guys. Well, as we close this episode out on prayer, I want to again thank everybody who takes the time to listen to these podcasts. We we're excited about the opportunity to share with you. I'd ask you to go back and take a look at our YouTube page, subscribe to it. James is adding some new content to it as we speak. Also, our Facebook page, Rethinking Faith. Please think about joining a Facebook page. It's a great place for interaction that we can't necessarily do while we're doing live recordings like this. So it's a great place to add some thoughts and let us know what you're thinking. But on behalf of James, Ray, myself, blessings to you, blessings to those that you invite to get out and invite at least one person to listen. Like James says, go back through the episode, bring somebody else into the listen, and then sit down and talk amongst yourself and ask those questions. Ask the questions that you just need to wrestle with, and begin to uncover some of the ideas and concepts that maybe you just have never listened to before or had an opportunity to hear before. So we're going to close this out. You have just listened to Rethinking Faith. Have a great week.